I will call to order the meeting of the Washington County Criminal Justice Council. This meeting has been properly noted by the clerk's office. In terms of attendance, I will note the absence of Chief Deering, absence of County Executive Showman and Attorney Parham. Although we were expecting Attorney Parham to appear virtually, at this point there has been no sign-in, so we will note it as an absence. We will begin with rising for a moment of silent prayer followed by the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item on the agenda is to address the minutes that were posted. They should have been available to you in the packet that is available on the county website. If there are any corrections to the minutes or discussion of the minutes, now would be your opportunity. In the absence of that, they will stand as posted. All right, hearing none, those minutes will stand as posted. Congratulations. We have our first minutes as a CJCC. Turning to the subject of today's meeting, as a follow-up to our discussion from January, the group reached a consensus of wanting to start our work with some foundational training, having a solid understanding about how a CJCC should function and what type of work it should focus on to serve Washington County. To that end, I would like to thank Attorney Stern for partnering and identifying an outstanding resource to assist us with this work. And in that regard, I'd like to introduce both Justice Management Institute as well as Amy Wickman, who is here from Justice Management Institute. Hopefully you had a chance to peruse the website. I did provide Amy's profile as a link on the agenda. But Justice Management Institute is a nonprofit organization based in Arlington. They provide research, education, and training programs and technical assistance in areas of developing policies in the justice system, working on justice system planning, and focusing on operational improvements. Their mission is described as collaborating with justice professionals to shape practitioner-oriented solutions that are responsive, fair, equitable, and efficient. In conducting our substantial research to identify a partner to assist us with this work, Justice Management Institute was highly recommended. So we are excited to work with them. Notably, Waukesha County recently engaged JMI in their most recent strategic planning work. To put it into context, Waukesha has had CJCC and other similar structures in place for over 20 years. So they are a well-established entity. They are on the opposite end of their development. And so I was excited to see that JMI has local connections here as well. Hopefully you had a chance to review Amy's profile. A couple of things stood out from that profile. She, of course, has experience in areas of research, evaluation, process mapping, and criminal justice system coordination. She also co-leads JMI's National Network of Criminal Justice Coordinating Councils, which is this formal network of representatives from local CJCCs that provide peer-to-peer learning opportunities across the country. Eau Claire is one of the local CJCCs that we would recognize, who is a member of the National Network of Criminal Justice Coordinating Councils. So I appreciate her knowledge in that regard. Amy also is very familiar with Wisconsin. She is from Shorewood and attended University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. So it's a great opportunity to have someone who's well familiar with Wisconsin return and facilitate our learning in this way as well. So with that introduction, Amy, welcome to Washington County. And we look forward to our foundational training.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Great. Well, you just made my job so much easier, Judge, because let's take the first two slides. That's wonderful. That's okay. Okay, so as the judge said, I'm a program manager at JMI. And she gave a lovely description of what we do. It's actually really fun to listen to someone else talk about what JMI is, she had it perfectly correct. I've worked for JMI for 15 years, and as the judge said, I also am from Wisconsin. I just happened to be visiting my dad this week in Shorewood, so it was like perfect timing to be here for this meeting. So thank you very much for having me, and before I get into talking about CJCCs, I'm hoping we can just go around the room really quick. Tell me your name again, even though I tried to introduce myself to everybody, just tell me your name and your role, your title.
I'm sorry, I'm Julie Driscoll, I'm the Chief Health and Human Services Officer.
Marty Schulteis, the sheriff. Barry Bratz, district attorney. Mike Schlatten, one of the county supervisors, also chair of the public safety committee and vice chair of this.
Sandy Dearmont, circuit court judge.
Dave Sager, chief public safety officer. Kenneth Gannon, permission of call PC claim.
I'm Lonnie Todd, I'm Chief of Staff. Fran McLaughlin on Communications and County Tax Office.
Thank you. Okay, wonderful. Well, I'm very happy to be here today. I love finding reasons to come back to Wisconsin. It's been great to work in Waukesha. I try to find work throughout Wisconsin, so when we got this email from Brad, very excited. As the judge talked about, we work at JMI all across the country on all sorts of things related to justice systems. We do things like help courts with case processing challenges, work with prosecutors' offices and public defenders' offices to look at caseload, workload studies. We create programs, we evaluate programs, we do all sorts of things. But my most favorite thing to do is work on CJCCs and justice system collaboration. And I should start by saying, I'm going to use the acronym CJCC all the time. It sounds like you guys already know what that is. You have one. So if I ever use an acronym that you don't know, just raise your hand, let me know. I'll try not to though. So along with my colleague, Tom Everly, who I usually do this with, so I apologize if I'm, too fast, talking too fast, or if I go back and forget something. But we created the National Network of Criminal Justice Coordinating Councils about 15 years ago. We started with 10 members, we've grown to 40, and the PowerPoint slides, which you also have in front of you, have a QR code if you want to see the 40 members of the network. They do include 5 jurisdictions from Wisconsin. Wisconsin has really strong CJCCs, which is I'm very proud of. But you have Eau Claire County, Waukesha County is one of ours, Milwaukee, Dane, and then Chippewa County. So all those 5 are part of the 40. And the purpose of the network is it brings together high functioning criminal justice coordinating councils to talk about what they're working on. And I call them high performing, but honestly, councils change over time. You could be high performing one year and another year you're really struggling. So at the time that they applied, they were high performing, but we don't let them go even if they're struggling. So we have those 40 members. And our goal in that work is really to just grow the use of CJCCs around the country. Because we are a little biased, but we think they're a very important part of the criminal justice system. Okay, so I know these slides are a little hard for you to see. I do have handouts, so if you want to follow along, if it's too hard to see. I don't have each slide in there, but the main ones are in there. So I'm here really today to help you learn about criminal justice coordinating councils. I know this is your second meeting, and you're still finding your footing. But my goal is to help you learn about what I know and what I've learned from councils across the country. And if it's something I don't know, I'm happy to look into it for you and come back and provide that information. But my goal today is just to help you. So if there's any questions you have along the way, I hope you stop me and ask questions. You don't have to wait till the end. This should really be a discussion, if at all possible. Councils that communicate and talk to one another are much stronger than ones that just sit and listen the whole time. So it's really great to jump in, ask me questions, push back if you think something doesn't sound right for Washington County. I invite all of that commentary. Okay, so I'm going to provide a lot of information today. And because there is so much to talk about for CJCCs, this could be an entire day. I'm going to try to pare it down as quickly as possible and give you kind of a high level understanding of what we learned and what we put together. But I'll also then try to really drill down into some specifics and things that could help you, tools that you could use, examples that you can learn from in other jurisdiction. So I'm gonna start with some really dense material. It's probably kind of boring, and then hopefully get into some more interesting stuff. So again, stop me anytime, and please let me know if I'm talking too fast. I tend to do that, and like I said, I usually have a partner with me, so we can like bounce off each other. So bear with me if I'm a little quick. Okay. So I have three objectives today. One is to provide you an overview of, a high level overview of what CJCCs do. Talk to you about the national standards that were created about CJCCs. And then tell you what other CJCCs are doing, what they've accomplished, and lastly, offer resources for you to use going forward. In other words, I'm gonna start high level and get more specific after that. Okay, before I jump in, I'm gonna ask you all a question. What do you already know about CJCCs? I know you have one, so that helps. But what have you learned about them so far? And just, we don't have to go around the room, you can just tell me.
Well, it's basically a gathering of interested parties within the county to make sure that our criminal justice system is operating in the best interest of the constituents and the people who are involved in the criminal justice system.
Anyone else?
Most of what I learned has been through osmosis, because this is my first CJCC, but generally it can serve to address challenges that exist in the system, but also be proactive to forecast what are expected challenges and then address them in a proactive fashion rather than being reactive, which is typically how the justice system evolves.
Great. Anyone else? Have you all been to any other CJCC meetings or talked to anybody else who serves on a CJCC? Not that you should have, I just was curious. Okay. Okay. So we'll start with really basic idea. What is a CJCC? In the national standards, we created the standard definition. I'm not going to read it to you, but it is in your handouts. It boils down to working collaboratively to improve the criminal justice system. So you have key stakeholders who are coming together regularly and working collaboratively. It's very simple. But they go sometimes by different names. They're not all called CJCC. That's the most typical name. But there's other ones such as the Criminal Justice Advisory Group, which is what Charlotte, North Carolina calls theirs, or Criminal Justice Commission, which is what it's called in New Orleans. And they are usually typically county level councils, but they can sometimes be city level or a combination of the two, or even regional. And then some states are starting to mandate the use of CJCCs, especially if there's funding that's going through the state to the counties. They want to see that they have some kind of collaborative council that's there to figure out how that funding is going to be used and monitor how it's used. So that's starting to happen more and more. I think the most recent was Utah or New Mexico. And then a little more history about them. They started as far back as the 1930s in LA to focus on juvenile delinquency. And then they became popular again with law enforcement assistance funding. And then I think the greatest increase was around jail overcrowding, a reaction to jail overcrowding. And that's where a lot of them were formed, a lot of those older ones like Waukesha. I'm assuming that was why they were formed as well. And then more recently, they're getting popular because there's a broader scope. We're looking at things like behavioral health issues and homelessness and other things that the criminal justice system isn't designed really to tackle those issues. And they have to come together, all the partners have to come together and talk about how to work on these things, those challenges. Okay, so in 2023, we worked with the National Institute of Corrections to create national standards for CJCCs. And there's a QR code on your handout or on this slide that'll take you to that if you want to look at that more closely. JMI led this effort to create the national standards with a group of CJCC leaders from the network, folks who have been in those roles for a long time, who know a lot about how CJCCs work. And we also did a survey beforehand to find out what is the most effective part of your CJCC, what makes it work well, and what makes them high performing. From all that information and expertise, we created a framework and guidance for creating a new CJCC or for strengthening an existing one. And these standards were really created because systems are more effective when partners are working together, when stakeholders come together and work together and collaborate. And this CJCCs have been considered a best practice for decades, but there was really no framework for how to create one. There's an older document from Bob Cushman that is very helpful and has been very helpful, but there was no real framework of like, this is how a CJCC should look and what it should do. So we created for that reason, but also to spread the word about CJCCs and try to elevate the use of them around the country and get more to be formed. And these are a lot of questions we were receiving before creating the standards. How do we do this? Where do we start? What are the most important things? What should it look like? So that was the reason for these standards. And the National Institute of Corrections is very supportive of criminal justice coordinating councils and really saw the value in this as well. Now, this document is 80 pages. It is very boring. You're not going to read it cover to cover, but it's more like a resource. It's if you need something, you want to find out about one specific thing about how to do that in your CJCC, you can go to it, read the standards, read the description, and learn something about what you're looking for. So I'm going to go over some stuff in the standards, not too in depth because you guys are all going to fall asleep. But I'm going to highlight a few things. First is the guiding principles that were created. The team that was working on this realized there's a lot of similar philosophies across CJCCs. Even though all your jurisdictions are very different, even your neighbor jurisdiction could be very different. There was still a similar philosophy, and we wanted to capture these in these guiding principles. So there's 11 of them. I'm not going to read them. But they're really a mindset of how you go into your CJCC as a member, the kind of mindset that you have going into the meeting and what you should be thinking about as you work and collaborate with your partners. So the gist of these are, we're gonna work together, we're gonna harness our collective power for the greater good of our community. I'm hoping we can just take 1 second to read these over and let me know, what do you think, what jumps out at you? Are any of these what you already feel are a guiding principle for you coming in today? Or what you'd like to see as your guiding principles for your council? They're in your handout too. I know it's pretty small. Or anything that you see that you're like, that's not at all how I feel we should be moving forward.
Just to provide some feedback from my perspective, when I look at these principles in total, these are really the philosophies that were in my mind when, what better worded, but in my mind when I was really reaching out to everyone, these stakeholders and saying, would you be willing to participate in a CJCC? Because here are some of the benefits that may come from engaging in these philosophies. So better worded, but I think underlying really where everyone was coming from when they wanted to join the CJCC and get it up and running. Is there any that stands out to any other member that really speaks to you?
Well, certainly from my perspective, enhancing public safety and trust, and that's in my role, I think that's certainly my top priority. And I know that collaboration is one way that we can certainly achieve that. So that's certainly one that stands out to me and one of my goals in this organization in this group.
Yes.
I'll go. The second one, collaborate, build consensus and share responsibility. It's the partners at the table that bring individuals to our agency of Department of Corrections to supervise. So ultimately, it takes a team, a community to be able to facilitate, the concerns, the problems, the incarceration, and then lead on the Department of Corrections to continue to supervise and change the shape of that person. So it really takes a team.
Anybody else? I don't want to force you to talk, so.
I would just add, I think, this group in particular, I think is very, keen to, want to be innovative and want to follow best practice and evidence-based solutions. And I think, this sort of guru for this type of activity can really bring people together on what that is. And for me, that's also connected to the transparency and accountability. And then, maximizing resources, because we want to do all the things, but we can't do everything. So what is the most important thing, what's gonna have the biggest impact for us?
It's very true, it's great for CDCC to talk about.
And to me, the second column, the utilized data and research, I think each one of us has our own data that we work with. And I guess it's very interesting to see how our data, how it impacts other people's data and how, I mean, the total scope of it. Sometimes I think my data might be very narrowly focused and I think that's what I'm kind of looking forward to.
Most people aren't looking forward to talking about data, so
Yeah,
that's really good.
normally-
That's a good sign. I love it, but most people don't. Okay, great. Anyone else before I move on? Okay, before I delve deeper into the standards, I'm just gonna put them in perspective a little bit. These are intended as a guide, so it's, like I said before, it's not a rule book, it's a guidebook. And they're intended to be aspirational. You'll see we created a model CJCC, but it's not every CJCC is gonna look like that. In fact, I don't know anybody that fits the model perfectly. And most importantly, the CJCC needs to fit the needs of your county and your community. If it doesn't, if the standards don't fit what you need, you don't have to follow them. They're not a rule at all, so. Fit what makes your county, what fits your county and your community, and that takes precedence over any of the standards. And lastly, it really takes time to create a CJCC. I mean, you guys really hit the ground running, you already have bylaws and you have a lot of stuff in place already. But it takes a long time to find your footing, figure out what you're gonna work on, and really have some of these things in place that I'm gonna talk about. You can't just show up one day and have all these things fall into place.
Amy, if I could interrupt, to that point, one of the conversations we had back in January was about other CJCCs in Wisconsin, of which there are many.
Yeah.
All of which are longer established than us, because we just have started. And so could you give us some understanding about when it would be reasonable for this group to expect to be close to fully functioning and maybe handling business or some type of project or priority? What would be a reasonable timeframe, just so we can level set for the group?
Sure, well, honestly, it varies. If you could be ready tomorrow to start working on something, as long as you sat here for the rest of the day, you probably could do it. But no, if you wanted to work on a strategic plan where you're figuring out some priorities you wanna work on, that might take a few months, and since you only meet quarterly, it might take longer than that. You could have work groups that meet in between meetings that are helping decide what priorities you're gonna work on. But also, if you all already came together around one thing that you specifically wanna work on right away, I mean, that could start happening much sooner. So even though we advise that a strategic plan is a really good way of moving forward, there might be some things very specific that you're just ready to work on right away and you wanna tackle. And maybe the strategic plan comes next. I know it's not a very helpful answer, because it can really vary, depends on what you wanna work on. But,
Thank you.
yeah, but you could be ready, I mean, you're already very far, honestly, I'm not just saying that. To have bylaws in place and have your officers chosen and your members chosen, and a meeting schedule in place, that's pretty impressive. Okay, so what does the model CJCC look like? We had to create a model for the standards because that's what the standards are for. But like I said, every CJCC is different. And these are the components that make up what we consider a high functioning council. And most of these, again, come over time. So first, you have a full council of decision makers from across the criminal justice system, representation from every part of the system. And those high level decision makers are at the table. They're showing up every time, they're participating. Not sending a delegate or a proxy. Sometimes you have to send a proxy, but that if you do, that person is ready to make a decision on your behalf. And you use them very minimally. So having decision makers at the table is the number one piece of the model. And then having officers that lead and guide the council having an executive or steering committee that is a very small group. In some places, it's only like 3 people. It could be larger than that, but and they proactively manage the CJCC and its committees. So they might be coming up with the agenda. They might be doing other things kind of behind the scenes before the CJCC meets. Then you have data and research, which monitors the system and tells you about trends that are happening and how to inform priorities in your discussion. Then you have committees and work groups, and these groups are really doing a lot of the work in between your meetings. And those aren't necessarily all of you, those could be your staff. We recommend that at least one member of the CJCC sits on a committee so that they can report back to the CJCC. But these are generally made up of other people from your offices. Who are boots on the ground folks who really know what's happening and can kind of talk about what things are gonna look like in real life. Having a strategic plan to guide the fundamental work of the council and the core initiatives. Community outreach and engagement. Again, this can happen over time. It's especially a new CJCC, that's a tough one to be ready to tackle. But, you know, maybe bringing a community member onto your council. Maybe providing communications to your community to tell them what you're working on, to tell them what you're doing. So involving the community is really important. And then lastly, having a dedicated director or staff person. We call these coordinators sometimes or directors, they have different names. We like to push for a director level because it's someone who's sitting at the table with you often, or they're really trying to help move things forward and communicate with elected officials. We really should have a high position, so we like to consider those directors. But this person provides support to the CJCC. They keep everything moving forward. They can help onboard new members. They can encourage your participation. So if someone's not showing up, they go to the person's office, talk to them about why they might not be coming to the CJCC, if there's a problem going on. I like to refer to them as the cruise director. They're really behind the scenes, making sure everything is working. Sometimes they're out in front though. Sometimes they're talking to the community, telling what you're doing. So this position, even though it might seem frivolous, ends up being a very important position. And a lot of CJCCs, when they have to lose that person, feel really at a loss because they really hold the CJCC together and they do a lot of the work in the background. So this might seem overcomplicated. It's a lot of pieces and you're brand new, but these again happen over time. And as you grow, you learn what you might need or what you might not need. So this is just kind of an overview. I'm gonna pause there and see if there's any questions about this model.
Maybe to the data and research aspect of which I think not just the sheriff, but many members are interested in and value that. Is there a best practice for how that role is fulfilled, how that is supplied to the group?
The data.
Yes, data and research aspects.
Yeah, there's not really a rule or a guide on that. We are trying to create key performance indicators for CJCCs. Of course, that's gonna look different in every jurisdiction, so it's hard to create one model. But I'll talk about that a little bit later. That doesn't really answer your question about how to get the data. That is really different based on jurisdiction. That is something that a staff person could be very helpful in doing. Or also you could make that one of your strategic priorities, is to figure out where the data is going to come from, what data you all have. And that's where you can really rely on those work groups or committees. You can have, if you have data analysts in your office, or if you have data analysts who work in the county, they can serve on that committee. They can help you figure out where data is coming from. So you don't necessarily have to do that work, but you can find those who can help.
Thank you, and that answers part of my question, or at least most of it, because I look around the table and almost everyone here has a separate data and data supply that they would be able to provide to the committee. And my thought process was, well, how do we assemble all of that, and how do we, digest it and present it in combination with each other? But your suggestion to look internally to other county resources that may already perform a similar function is a good one. So
Good, and just to give you an example, I know in Portland, Oregon, they had I don't know if it's still functioning, but they had a data committee And so on that committee was a data person from each of the offices of the CJCC members, if they had them. Some offices I know aren't lucky enough to have that. But if they have that position, those individuals went to that committee. And those folks met with each other every other month to talk about what it was the CJCC needed. And because they know about what data is collected, how it's collected, how they can share it, it made it a lot easier than if all of you were trying to have those conversations. So that can be very helpful. Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions about this? Yeah.
Are there, I know 2 years ago, I think my office members working on the performance dashboard for the CJCC. Partnership with
Good question. I don't know if Milwaukee created theirs yet. I remember hearing about that, but I'm gonna ask Katoya is her name, who's the director there. I'll ask her if that ever came to fruition. Because I don't know of a CJCC specific dashboard that exists. It might exist. I know Eau Claire is working on one. I think Tiana there is calling it her executive dashboard. So she's the director there, so it's kind of her dashboard, but I think it's to be shared with the whole council. But that is what we would like to move towards. I know Tom and I, my colleague Tom and I, are really trying to get a model, key performance indicators, but then also find a way to make that a dashboard for CJCCs to use. And sometimes that's very overwhelming, especially if you haven't even started collecting data yet. To have a dashboard seems like a lot, but I think it would be really useful in a lot of councils and communities. Good question. I'll find out about Milwaukee. Any other questions? All those attributes in that model CJCC are covered in the standards in these sections. These are all the sections of the standards. And they all have commentary in them that describe the standards and what they mean and why we came to those standards. And like I said earlier, you already have a bunch of these, which is great. I know CJCCs that have been around for a lot longer and don't have any of the things that you have, so that's pretty good. Okay, and then I just wanted to share an example of what one of the standards look like. So when you're looking at them, this is what you're gonna see. I pulled these from the membership standard, and these are just 3 of them. So a CJCC should have executive level leaders with the authority to make decisions. I already talked about that one earlier. And that a council should be a manageable size to fulfill its mission. Sometimes councils can grow too large. Yours is a great size, but let's say you keep adding people and it gets to be a very large room of people that nobody wants to talk because there's too many people in the room and they don't feel safe saying the things that they want to say. And councils should really be a safe place to have those conversations. I mean, I know it's not the safest, but it's, you should be able to talk freely and have open dialogue. So they can be too large. They can also be too small or too narrow in scope so that you're not covering all of this criminal justice system and the systems that align with it. And then lastly, there should be minimal use of proxies, which I already talked about a little bit. But it is important to have a proxy so that if somebody has to be unavailable, they can send that person and that person can make those decisions on their behalf. And that's just an example I wanted to show. Now let me talk a little bit about the benefits of having CJCCs. And all this work goes into creating a council. I showed you that model. It's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of administrative stuff. It's a lot of boring stuff. And you're all a lot of very powerful people sitting around the room. This is a very expensive meeting. And you're just advisory in nature. So you don't have like a lot of authority to make changes, but you can still be very powerful because collaboration and talking to one another and learning about the impact that changes in your system are having or what the future is going to look like, and talking about it together is very important. So before creating the standards, we conducted a national survey, which I mentioned earlier, of nearly 500 CJCC members. So these come from all different professions. We had law enforcement, judges, probation officers, everybody, across the system who serves on a council. And we asked them about the impact of their CJCC. And there was overwhelming support for the use of a CJCC. I'm so sorry. The clicker's not working, so mouse is not great. And they had a lot of overwhelming support for creating a criminal justice coordinating council. They had lots of negative things to say about certain aspects, but on this, they had wonderful things to say that having a CJCC improved system efficiency overall, that it improved communication between the partners, that it improved cooperation, and that it serves an important role. They did not want their CJCC to go away. So this is really important, and these are really high percentages. You don't get this much approval in most surveys, so it says a lot for the impact of CJCCs. I'm gonna pause and ask him one question. What do you think the CJCC will do for your county? What are you hoping that it's really gonna do for Washington County?
As an elected official, I'm not sure. I met all these people, at our first meeting, right? But I really don't know the intricacies of what every department does. I'd like to think that everybody's working together, just swimming on it, everybody's on the same page, but I don't know that, so. Really, I'm hoping that this committee, not only can we demonstrate cohesiveness, that we're working on behalf of all the constituencies, but also then that I personally can report back to the board that, yeah. The people in the room, the people involved in criminal justice are doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. We all expect that, but it would be really good to have that evidence.
It's a great answer. A lot of times, nobody knows what's going on. No, people aren't talking to one another. It's very important.
Yeah, I would add to that, I think to have a place to bring big decisions. I think, when we start talking about the layer of federal government, state government, and local government, everybody's trying to solve problems. And a lot of times problems are being solved through legislation. And then, it's about, well, how does it impact us locally? And right now, sort of our process is, you might have a department or two that talks about it and sort of makes a decision, or even a decision gets made at a lower level. And then it doesn't always implement great, or, people aren't really fully aware, or people didn't get to have their voice or their opinion in it. So I think to have that space to bring some of these decisions or conversations.
I spend my days in a courtroom, and so a lot of what happens outside of the courtroom, then finds its way into the courtroom in terms of the criminal justice system. And, then decisions are made in the courtroom that have a ripple effect afterwards as well. And I think there's a vacuum of understanding, how, policies and procedures, that occur before, that occur inside, and that occur after affect, all of the varying stakeholders. Because there hasn't been an opportunity for strong communication and collaboration and exchange of information. And so there's a number of procedures and policies that may have historically existed or currently exist that may have had unintended consequences because there's just no understanding about how it lands in other environments. And not for anything other than just a lack of opportunity to communicate about it and understand it. And so I really see this group as an opportunity to communicate and share that, and then look for opportunities for improvement. We're a relatively well-functioning justice system, I think, overall, and we should be grateful for that, but there's always the opportunity for improvement, and I think that's really what this council creates.
All good answers. Anybody else? Okay, so now what do CJCCs work on? In that same national survey, we asked CJCCs what they're doing. And keep in mind, this was a few years ago. But this is a list of the common initiatives at that time that we did the survey. And their initiatives are combined into categories. So behavioral health, record management, diversion, pretrial release, treatment services, case processing and reentry. These are just the top ones. And to just give some examples of things like that. In Las Vegas, they were developing a behavioral health continuum in collaboration with the casinos. In Yavapai County, they're creating a behavioral health database so that officers can use that in real time when they're on the street. In New Orleans, they're creating a universal record management system using ARPA funding and a Microsoft grant. In Flagstaff, Arizona, they created diversion services that are more responsive to their indigenous population. And then in Douglas County, Kansas, and in Waukesha, they're looking at the use and impact of the existing diversion programs to figure out how they can be more effective and used more appropriately. And then in Charles County, Maryland, they're forming a pretrial supervision program. So those are some examples from that survey, but then I also wanted to provide some more recent examples that we received from our national network members. So we have, here I'm just gonna rattle off a bunch of things, but feel free to stop me and ask questions about them. So in Buncombe County, North Carolina, their CJCC helped to create court navigator positions. So somebody that's standing at the, the doorway of the court, helping people to know where they're supposed to go. If they have legal matters, they're not providing legal advice, but they're helping them figure out where they need to take that and what's the next step. And then in Oklahoma County, they're adopting data metrics for their CJCC to track. I don't think it's gonna be at the level of a dashboard, which we talked about earlier, but just having those specific metrics that they want to continually track. In Helena, Montana, they created a citizen advisory group, which has been very effective, and that citizen group reports back to the CJCC to talk about things that they're seeing in the community. East Baton Rouge and Louisiana and Columbus, Ohio, have worked on warrant resolution. They have warrant resolution clinics where folks can come in, get their warrant resolved, or at least figure out what the next step is and get their new court date set. In Albuquerque, they're creating a dashboard so that law enforcement can know when the youth detention facility is full. Gun violence heat maps were created in Colorado. Reentry pilot program in Charlotte, North Carolina. This is true of many councils, but in Las Vegas, they're really working to reduce their failures to appear. And then in Flagstaff, Arizona, they created a justice bus, which is a group of criminal justice practitioners who go to the reservation and tribal lands to help them resolve warrants and figure out how they need to move their case along, similar to the warrant resolution clinics in those other jurisdictions. So those are just some examples. And I really want to share these because these probably wouldn't have happened without the CJCC in those communities. There's folks coming together, talking about what's needed, sharing what their office sees as the greatest need, and maybe why something might not work. If just one entity wanted to create one of these initiatives, there might be reasons that it wouldn't work for another agency in the county. So when you're all at the table talking about what this is going to look like, it can be very powerful and make it come to fruition much more easily and effectively. Any questions about this? I know you're having a lot.
I have a question and maybe this isn't the appropriate setting, the reduction on failure to appears. What actions are being taken on that?
That's a really good
That's
question.
really interesting.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be able to answer that off the top of my head for Las Vegas, especially that was the example I had for them. My coworker works in Las Vegas, so he would know what that means exactly, what they're doing. But I will say there are a lot of councils I know that is one of their focuses, because every county, I think, struggles with failures to appear. It's very, very difficult, it's very challenging.
And
Sorry.
I don't want to speak for you, but I suspect you raise that because you see it frequently
Correct.
and you probably suspect that it's expensive.
Yes.
Okay, because your office invests time and resources into it. I assume the sheriff invests time and resources into it as well. I know the court system is investing time and resources into it. So failure to appear has a significant ripple effect. I think it's a great question to raise and depending on the interest of the group, but measuring it and understanding how it impacts the stakeholders, I think would be important to understand that. Should be something that.
I was just gonna say, I think a lot of times that's part of a robust pre-trial monitoring program, where you have individuals that are reaching out to these individuals, hey, how are you getting to court? Do you know you have court, that type of thing. That's what I've seen.
Combined with like use of technology for reminders,
Yes.
and making sure you're capturing correct contact information in the court system and make it appear, which is a function of the court system.
Not a catch-all, but that's one possibility.
So yeah, reducing those FTAs is a great project for a CJCC. Because it's not just one department's problem, it's all of your problems for the most part. And that is something that a lot of councils work on, as you talked about how costly FTAs are. It made me think there's a county in Washington, Spokane County, that try to capture how much a FTA costs, like what does it cost every department, and then add those up and talk about how to reduce those costs. And how to make it helpful for the defendant to get to court. I mean, we need to understand what the reason is for the FTA so that we can try to resolve those. So that's a great project for CJCC to work on. Any questions about this list?
Amy, could you speak to any projects that you're aware of or priorities that you're aware of that focus on behavioral health, mental health issues and how they interact in the justice system?
Sure, and probably after I leave this meeting, I'll think of other ones, so as I think of them, I can send you information about them. I know in, Yavapai County, I mentioned briefly, they were working on, a dashboard for law enforcement to be able to use to find out where individuals have already been through behavioral health services. So when they run into a situation on the street where it might not be, a high enough level offense to take someone into custody, but they want to try to help them, they can look at the dashboard and learn where they already had connections with services. Where could I call and get someone to come and help me with this, or, refer this person to that location? That's one example. I will say that almost every council I know of has a behavioral health committee. So I think probably every single one of them has an initiative they're working on. And that another example I thought of is competency. I don't know if competency is a issue in your community where those cases are taking a while. A lot of CJCCs are working on that as well. I know in Flagstaff, they created they call it Rule 11, is their competency hearing. It's a pre-Rule 11, so it's before you file for competency. You try to resolve the case and figure out how you might be able to get that person the help they need before going down that competency road, which can be very lengthy. Those are just some examples off the top of my head, but I will think of more and I'm happy to share them.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? Then I thought I'd provide two examples of strategic plans. I know this is pretty hard to see, and even in your handout, it's pretty small, but that QR code will take you to the full strategic plan so you can see it. This first one is from Yavapai County, which I mentioned them already. That's Prescott, Arizona. And we've been working there to help them with their strategic plan. So that's why I have it to show as an example. But they created this plan with these priorities. They want to work on enhancing their CJCC operations. They've been around for a while, but they were really struggling. It turned out that the folks who would come to the meeting were mostly judges, and it became very court focused. They really just talked about the problems in the court, and nobody else really weighed in. So we brought all those folks back together. Law enforcement especially felt like they didn't have a place at the table, and now I think they do. They feel like they have things to talk about. They have an important role in the council, but they're going to continue working on their CJCC operations. And then data and information technology. Optimizing resources in their lower courts, so that's like the misdemeanor courts. And then improving case processing times and looking at how they compare to case processing standards. And then reducing recidivism. Public safety is probably their #1 concern, so that was a very high priority for them. And then I realize this is impossible to read from where you are. But this is just, if you follow that QR code, you'll be able to see this. And it just breaks down those priorities into more specific objectives. I'll just highlight a couple. So in data and technology, They're interested in using dashboards and collecting data more regularly. But they're also looking at improving digital evidence management for their attorney's offices by using AI powered redaction. Because they're finding there's a lot of delays as they try to go through all this body cam footage. And so using AI might be really helpful for them. This is just part of their plan. They're exploring it. They're seeing how much it's gonna cost and if it would save them money in the end. They also want to create a real-time operations center or real-time crime center for their law enforcement. And then in the case processing category, they want to establish a legal defender's office, which is kind of like the conflict counsel for the public defender's office. And let's see. They want to enhance the use of pretrial services. It's being underused right now, so FTAs are a concern of theirs, and they want to make sure that using pretrial effectively is to reduce those FTAs. So those are just some examples. And if you want to spend more time looking at their plan, you have that QR code. But it's important to remember that even with a strategic plan, you have to be flexible. You know, you're coming up with a 3 to 5 year plan and things can happen. You have COVID that changed everything. I mean, like something could happen tomorrow that is going to derail your plan entirely. So you have to be able to be flexible and you have to know that it's going to change over time and that's okay. But you're coming up with shared goals right now that you want to work towards. And here's the second example. We're also working in Douglas County, Kansas, which is Lawrence. And this QR code will take you to their website, which has their document on there. They also have a lot of other stuff on their website if you wanted to see, you know, what their agendas look like or what else they're working on. And their plan focuses on some similar stuff to Yavapai. Data-informed decision-making, strengthening their pretrial process. They too are worried about FTAs and wanting to use their pretrial supervision appropriately. And then looking at current programs and their effectiveness, similar to what Waukesha County wants to do. You know, are these programs working? Are we using them on the right people? And then developing a communications plan, which I think is very important and a really helpful thing for CJCC to do. Because we don't communicate well enough. I mean, the criminal justice system does a terrible job of communicating what it's doing, and especially its successes, the things that you're really doing well and you're working together, and you should be able to tell the community what you're doing. And it feels like a heavy lift, especially for folks whose communications is not their job. So having someone who can help you with your communications and creating a plan and getting the word out after all your meetings and the initiatives you're working on can be really powerful. And then both of these examples, the CJCC really came together a lot. They spent a lot of time together to talk about their priorities. You know, there was a lot of pushback. Some, you know, the public defender might want one thing and the county attorney or district attorney doesn't want that. But you come together to talk about what you share, what goals you do share, and talk about what priorities should look like for your CJCC. These two counties also convene focus groups with line staff. So this is something that JMI helped with in both those communities. We had these focus groups, so we learned more about what line staff are feeling, what they're noticing, trends they're finding, things they think the CJCC should be working on. Because you all might have an idea in your mind, but maybe your staff would disagree, or maybe they see things that you don't know about. So those focus groups can be really helpful. And then we also did surveys in both counties. In Douglas County, we also gave the community the survey, which was helpful. And then looked at data. We found the data that was available and we shared it with the council to show them this is what's happening, these are the trends. What does this data tell you that you want to work on? And then we also held a retreat in both those counties. Those aren't always necessary, but you know, if you block off some time where you're all together and you're not gonna, you know, check your email, you're just working on this, it can be helpful, but it's not mandatory. And then from all that work, they created these 2 plans. And this is the timeline for the Douglas County plan. I just wanted to share it. Again, it's pretty small. But this just shows you, these are the objectives they had under each of those priorities and how they're seeing them play out in the next 3 years. And I wanted to just share one other thing. You know, you come up with these strategies and and initiatives, but that's not all you're working on. You know, something might come up in your court or in your probation office tomorrow where you're like, we need to talk about this at the next meeting. It doesn't need to be on the plan. It's important that CJCCs talk about current issues, and they're not just talking about these strategies. These are just your long-term goals. So hopefully I've provided some helpful resources already, but let me provide a few more that might be maybe even more helpful. Before I do so, any questions about strategic planning or those strategic plans? Okay, so I talked about the national standards, and those can be overwhelming. That's why we also created the essential elements. It's a companion piece to the standards. There's a QR code, you can check those out. It's a lot of the same information as the standards, but in a much more digestible form. And really scales it down to these are the 10 things, the 10 attributes of a high-performing CJCC. And so this can be more helpful, especially for a new CJCC. And each of the 10 elements in this document has a one-page summary along with the key factors, and then references to specific standards. And this makes for a much simpler place to start. And it also has a couple of tools, which I'll get into in a moment. First, I'm going to go through the 10 essential elements, and these will look very similar to that slide I showed with the cogs of a model CJCC. There's a lot of repetition. So first, being system focused. So you're looking at the overall system, not too narrow the scope. You're guided by a common mission, which you already are. You're maximizing resources. Number 2 is to have active participation, which we talked about a couple of times already. Effective leadership and officers. I will say that, you know, officers can change, and you might have a really strong leader for a while, and that person retires. And then someone else comes in and it's, you know, their duty to take over, but it might not be their passion. So really finding the right person to lead and be the officer can be very important. Let's see, relying on consensus building for decision making. Having productive conversations to find common ground, so not just spend the whole hour and a half arguing, but really trying to be productive. And then just reserving voting for procedural matters, things like approving minutes or you know, simple things like that, what kind of data you're going to collect. And then number 5 is having regular and organized meetings. Number 6 is having committees and work groups that advance the work. 7 is a strategic plan that guides the work, which we already talked about, a 3 to 5 year plan that's measurable. And it's good to have short and long-term goals, so you can have some quick wins in there, not just long-term. Having data that informs your decisions. Using community engagement and sharing of information with the community. And then staff who can coordinate and advance the work. So these are all 4 elements that make for a great CJCC. Again, this is aspirational and it can take time. And I know a lot of this is repetitive from before, but are there any questions about these or reactions to any of these? Next, let me show you a couple of tools. So in that document, the essential elements, there's a few checklists and an assessment. I also gave them to you as separate handouts. So first is the checklist. There are 3 within the essential elements document. One for the planning phase, one for the implementation phase, and one for the sustainability phase. Now, these aren't necessarily linear, and since you all are new, you could probably do a little bit of the planning. You could look at the planning phase checklist and then move on to the implementation checklist. See what you already have, what you want to have, and rule out things that you just don't think will be appropriate for your CJCC. It's just gonna be a helpful tool to use as you go forward. You know, you can do the checklist now and then do it again in a year and see what you think you're still missing and you wanna work on. And then just put the planning phase on the slide, but I know you can't really see that very well. We also have the handout, so you can look at that. And then I should mention also, in these checklists are the standards are linked to those, so you can see, you know, if you do want to pursue one of these items, you can figure out where the standards talk about it and look at it more closely. Then there's an assessment tool. This is a more comprehensive list of all the essential elements and the standards and the corresponding key factors. And this can help you compare yourself to the national standards. As a way to identify potential areas for improvement. This is usually used in a council that's been around for a little bit longer, that's established. But it's not a bad idea just to look at this now and say, where do you think you are? And then look again in a year and see where you think you are. And there's instructions in the essential elements that explain how you use this assessment tool and then how you use the scale of compliance. Any questions about those two tools? Then I'm gonna ask you another question. What do you think is gonna be the biggest challenge for the success of the Washington County CJCC? Just thinking about all these things I've talked about, or the challenges you already had in mind coming into it, what do you think is gonna be the hardest thing for this council? And it doesn't have to be topic areas, you don't want to say like data or FTAs or something, but, just the success of the sustainability of this council, or what kind of challenges you might have just to keep going.
Yeah, honestly, my biggest concern this morning, it's only our second meeting and we have 3 people that are here. Talking about failure to appear also affects this committee as well. And I'm not sure it's a cause for concern yet. But I wonder, right?
To echo that, I think it's ensuring that we have buy-in and commitment from all the members that this is going to take a bit of time in order to identify our priorities and get moving on them. So that's one. And then secondly, learning how to work with each other. I look around the table and everyone here is a decision maker in their own department, in their own agency. Many of us are elected. And none of us generally need to consult with each other in order to make decisions, and that's the entire mission of this group. So I think it's going to take some time to develop a rapport as a council and feel comfortable consulting with each other and working towards a consensus. And that's something that just takes time and willingness to engage in it. And there's no substitute for the time and the effort.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think that comes with the age of your CJCC. Some members might not show up because they don't know why it benefits them. They don't know the purpose of it. They don't understand. As time passes, they might learn like, oh, I wanted to be part of that conversation. Something comes out of the CJCC that they think, I missed out on that. I should go to those meetings. And that'll come with time. Anyone else?
I'll just somewhat echo what Judge Gearnott said. I mean, sometimes our interests don't always align. And, so there's potentially times where I come in and my position's different than somebody else at the table, and, but I think I agree, it's just gonna take time and collaboration and an understanding that sometimes we might not be in agreement, but, we are all here for the same reason, which is, taking a look at our criminal justice system here in Washington County and trying to make it the best criminal justice system we can make it. So, I'm sure that at some point throughout this process, there will be disagreements, but, that's okay.
Yeah, it's healthy. Good. Any other challenges? Let's see.
I'll just pipe in, because usually I don't speak up, right, Julie? So this is really interesting to me, and I just wanna, touch on B. Bronson and what the judge had to say. But everyone really has their own functionality. And putting these strategic priorities that's gonna be a challenge.
Yes.
Okay, because the sheriff's office, his job is to eliminate crime. right? Not just, I mean, that's the job. And then when there is crime, the DA is there to prosecute it. And then the judge's job is to oversee all of it, and then you got a county attorney who is mixed in with all of it as well. And we do have a lot of behavioral health issues, not just in Washington, but everywhere. And that's a huge concern of mine. We're struggling in Washington County, and I know Julie's office does great work, Andy does great work. And then, you know, when they all go to the Department of Correction, it's just like, okay, no, you take care of it. And it just gets shoveled over there, and so I guess I have a utopian thought process is that everyone can just get up, go to work, everyone has a job, everyone functions safely and effectively, but that's not the world in which we live. So this is really, truly, in my opinion, a very unique committee, very unique council, where you'd have different factions, everyone, you know, for the most part, half of it's elected. And it's really an interesting dynamic. I mean, I personally think our sheriff's department is the best ever. I mean, they have great people that do great work. I know the DA's office, he's relatively new, and he's got a different mindset than the previous DA coming in. And, you know, our judges, I mean, you're carrying what, 1,000 to 1,200 cases for each of you. I mean, that's quite a bit too. I mean, I would love to reduce all of that and get it to a manageable system. And then we have resources that we have challenges with. And coming from the state and all the dynamics there. And so I think those are just a few challenges, to say the least.
Yes,
So,
those are a few
but
challenges.
I think it's exciting, and I'm glad the judge brought it to the forefront and that we're all participating in it. And I know in the first meeting, you know, I was like Chief Gearing. I'm glad Chief Gearing said it. Cause I was kind of bashful in admitting that, like, he actually said, well, what does this do?
Yeah.
What are we here to do? And so I thank you for being here today. I thank the county attorney for setting this up and the judge to facilitate all these things. And so I think it's really an interesting dynamic that we can all participate in and provide Washington County constituents, like the supervisor said, that we're actually doing something to facilitate a better functioning system that's already, in my opinion, very well functioning.
It's fantastic. I should have recorded you because that was a really great answer. And you're preaching to the choir, because I too think this is a very unique and important way to bring people together. And it's a council that you don't see in a lot of places. I know I've talked about all the councils I know of, but really every community should have one. It can really help bring about change and also get everybody talking and understanding what is happening in each of their departments. And solve some of the issues that you're having. So,
I would just add to both what Dave and the judge said, I mean, you know, it's time, right? It takes time. It's relational, and, you know, being a social worker in the group, I think, you know, a challenge that I think everybody has to recognize is there's going to be a point in time when we all have to look at ourselves and our work and sort of put our egos aside and be willing to sort of dive deep, because, and you know, the system is perfect, but it's hard when you're working hard every single day and you're putting in all the effort to really say, okay, but this part of the system isn't working well, and you have to, you know, really look at it. And that's hard to do for anybody. So I think that's something that's worth for the group to be recognizing.
Do you have any idea why there's only 40 of these committees?
oh, there's more than that, but that's just part of our network.
Okay.
Because we're a nonprofit, we don't get any money for it, that's all we can
I'm
afford.
saying there's like
But yeah,
300 counties.
There's probably, we try to log how many we know of, and I have a list of 200. I'm sure it's actually longer than that, because some go by, some are much more informal. So I work with a county in South Dakota on something totally different, but they have what they call the lunch bunch. And it's essentially the same group, it's just very informal, they don't have an agenda or minutes. But they're doing essentially the same thing, and for them, that's what works for them. So like that group wouldn't make the list of CJCCs, even though it essentially functions as one. Of course, I'm biased. I think to be more sustainable, they should put some more formal processes in place, but, it works for them for now. About the not getting along, or, maybe you're gonna have disagreements. I think that is just natural, and it actually is really helpful for the criminal justice partners to talk through those. Even if you're unwilling to, change your opinion on something, just talking about it and learning why somebody believes the way they do can be really helpful. I know in Yavapai County, they have a lot of disagreements, and the public defender and the county attorney, they might get along outside of their offices, but when they're at the table, they disagree completely, down to like how we phrase justice involved. There's the county attorney. He doesn't like to call it that. He just wants them to be called defendants or criminals, or, and so those are the kind of arguments they would have, but that was really helpful. And maybe he didn't budge, but we all came to an agreement of what we're gonna use, and that's the beauty of a council. Great, well, you guys covered a lot of the challenges that we already see, but just some more I wanted to talk about is, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the change of leadership can be a challenge over time. People retire or the position changes, elections change positions. This can cause some lack of continuity over time, and it can be challenging. Maybe the person doesn't want to come to the table. And that can cause problems, but you just have to try to build your council strong enough that it can withstand those kinds of changes. I also see issues with having meaningful dialogue. Sometimes what happens as you progress is you have a lot of report outs or presentations, like me coming in and talking. And then everybody sits around the table and doesn't say anything, and you don't get to have those really meaningful conversations. We also saw that a lot with Zoom, everybody moving to Zoom during the pandemic. Then people they would just be checking their emails and doing whatever they wanted and not really having that dialogue. And even the dialogue that you have before and after this meeting is really important. When you're standing around the doorway, just chatting about something you learned about or saw. That's all really important. So sometimes CJCCs will get in a rut where they don't have that dialogue. Let's see, what else? Strategic planning. Nobody likes strategic planning. It's almost as bad of a word as data. People hate doing it. They don't want to spend time doing it, and then it usually just sits on a shelf somewhere. We try very hard to create plans that don't just sit on a shelf. But I know it's not fun to do, but it can be very important. It can be really helpful as you move forward and as you're getting your footing. And then finding and keeping staff. I know you don't have a director position. I don't know if you're interested in one. But that can be a struggle for councils that do have someone in place. Sometimes county resources don't pay them what they might get at a private company somewhere, so they lose people who are really great. And that's hard to deal with. And lastly, another resource problem some have is they come up with a strategic plan with all these great ideas, but then how do you make it work? You have to find the resources to do all those things. So that can be a challenge, but with all of you at the table, that's the beauty of a council, is you can figure out, what is really important to us and how can we make it work? And maybe we can pool our own resources. Sometimes we see that in places where offices will work together to provide resources together and make happen with what their strategic plan has in mind. Okay. So next I want to talk about data a little bit. I know some people glaze over about data or just don't want to talk about it. Some people love it. Some people are scared to share it or apprehensive about talking about what their data from their department might show. But it's really important, and it can be the data you want to share. So you should all agree on what kind of data you're looking for and what kind of data is available. It's really the hardest part is collecting data. So we are working in a jurisdiction where we created these performance indicators. Now there's 19 of them. This is a lot. You don't have to have this many. But these are things that are predominantly already being reported in their county. So they have them in annual reports somewhere, or maybe the administrative officer reports at the state level has it. NIBRS data is your crime data. You can already collect that. So the important part in collecting data, I think, is starting with what you already have, what's easy to report, what you're comfortable sharing with the rest of the council members. And have a conversation about what's gonna happen with this data. What do we wanna look at? Why do we wanna look at it? Is it just gonna be the folks around this table who see it? Are you gonna make it public? Just having those conversations about what the data should look like that you want to see and how it's going to inform you. That's really the most important thing I see with data is that it shows you the trends that are happening. So if your filings are going up, if certain crime offenses are going up, or down, or more FTAs, you can look at data over, we generally suggest like 3-year time periods, so you can see what kind of changes are happening. And this data could be annual data, it could be quarterly data, it could be monthly, depending on what is easiest for you to work on. And starting where you are and learning what you already have and what you can share, then you can determine what is it that's missing, what do we want to know, what other data would we like to see? And that's where that data committee that I talked about earlier could really help with that process. But I know that jumping into data is a little hard for a brand new CJCC, but I just wanted to put this out there. And you can start very simple. Some places talk about just their jail population, their average length of stay in the jail, their criminal court case filings, and their dispositions. Those are just 4 measures that probably already collected somewhere, and you could easily talk about those. It's something that seems so simple, but a lot of people around CJCCs don't know. Like, if I asked all of you what your jail population is today, would anybody know? Besides the sheriff? Okay.
That's all I do.
And is that higher than last month?
It's consistently going up after the pandemic.
So it's just helpful for people to all be on the same page and know what data is looking like across the system. But it can be scary to share, and it can be boring to share, so people don't like to look at data.
Amy, can you explain, when you say it, there could be apprehension, or you said scary to share? Could you comment on why that may be the case?
Yeah. From my perspective, it's usually scary to share because the concern is that someone won't read it the way that let's say the sheriff's sharing jail population data. They're nervous that the way that it's construed by the person reading it will be different than what it actually is saying. So just the level of understanding of the reader of the data is usually the scary part. But the other scary part is that they don't want to be judged on what their department is doing, or maybe it'll look like you're not doing enough, or you're not disposing enough cases in a timely manner, or you're arresting too many people, or you're not arresting enough people, or just the concern that your office is gonna look bad. But I think part of the council's importance is being open and, this is what's happening, this is the status currently, so why not share it? It shouldn't be scary, but it is, and I think the more you build trust around the table, that'll be easier to do.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
It does, and so in taking your comments one step further, I'm hearing you say that context can be very important.
Yes.
So making sure that members understand how to interpret the data of another agency. So for example, understanding from the sheriff's perspective, what does that number mean? It's say 259, is that high, is that low, how does that trend, right? So making sure the context is provided so that those digesting it understand it in the context of the agency who collects the data. Is that correct?
That's exactly correct, yeah. And this is something they've been talking about in Waukesha a lot. I know their sheriff is concerned with the data dashboard that they have and the understanding of the rest of the community of that data and putting context around it, very important. Yeah. Any other questions on data?
Would it make sense, like it was mentioned earlier, in some CDCs, doing more kind of broader strategic plan, some other CDCs, again, that would be a shared priority when coming within just, for example, so you're sharing FTAs and pre-trauma monitoring today. those are 19 KPIs.
Yeah,
If the CDCC had, some kind of shared piloting about reducing QAs, would it make sense, or is it common for them to see this instead of focus on that or specific to those priority areas?
yes, absolutely. Thank you for saying that. I should have said that as part of my presentation, but that is very important. So as you determine what you want to work on, collecting data around those initiatives is critical because you want to see the impact that your decisions are having. So that's very, very important. Any questions about data? There is a handout in your materials, the one with the green and white lines, yeah. So that is essentially this slide, but in a table that explains each of these key performance indicators a little more clearly. And that is from Yavapai County, so when you see county attorney on there, it's. And I will say, those are the KPIs they're currently working on collecting, so we're not sure it's gonna work. We're trying to help them with those. So I wanted to first ask,
We have about 5 minutes left in our planning time,
oh,
and I
yes,
do want to discuss next steps with the group as well.
perfect, I'm just pretty much closing up, just
Thank you.
quick. Thank you for saying that. So I wanted to give you a couple more resources before I go. And then these are in your document, so you have a strategic planning worksheet. That's the one, I think it's like orange, one table's orange, one's purple, one is blank, and one is filled in with an example. This is just a worksheet that we typically use as we start with strategic planning. And it allows you to kind of pick your priorities, objectives, who's gonna work on them, the timeline, things like that. And this just can be a handy tool as you start thinking about setting priorities. Then I also gave you an example of a committee charter. So we find these really helpful when you create a committee, especially out of your strategic plan. Let's say you want to work on reducing FTAs and you want to create a committee to work on that, giving them direction, specific objectives, deliverables. It's going to really help guide the committee. And then lastly, I gave you a director job description. This is just an example, so it's shouldn't have any real names in it, but it shows the responsibilities and capabilities that the person can bring to the position. And then lastly, I want to share that the national network is also a great resource. We have the website on there, and I gave you the QR code earlier. You can go to our website, there's some additional resources on there, but most importantly, those 40 members that make up our network, they are always willing to help other jurisdictions. They want to see CJCC succeed. They want to help others. And not only the directors of their councils, but also the members of their councils. So let's say you want to talk to your counterpart in another community, you want to find out what they think of their council, what they find most effective. I would be happy to connect you with any of those jurisdictions and their members. So then I was just gonna open it up for questions, and I can certainly talk about next steps. If you'd like. Any questions?
Do you feel like we gave you enough time today to do what you need to do to get us up and running? Or as we go forward, might we have to allocate a longer meeting at some point? I realize that's part of the next steps, but really, we want to be successful. We want to use your time wisely. So I would appreciate anyway, your input.
Wonderful. Yeah, well, today was just really an overview. I mean, like I said earlier, I could sit here and talk about this all day. So this is really just a high level overview. So I'm not confident that what I give you will just help you, be successful, though I do think you started very strong and are likely to be a very successful council. So I completely believe in you as a council. But my plan, as I understand it, is to come back again and talk with you all about your priorities, what you see as the priorities, kind of talk through those together and see if there's any consensus. And before doing so, I was hoping to have a one-on-one conversation with each of the members, by phone or Zoom, whichever is easiest. And just kind of talk about what you see. What do you want for your council? What are your priorities? What are the biggest challenges for you? And give you an opportunity to ask me more questions, because as you leave today, you might think of something else. You might want some information from another community. So that was my plan, was to meet with each of you individually and then come back and kind of talk about priorities. And from there, we can talk about what your next steps would be. And JMI provides technical assistance throughout for everything that you would possibly need for your CJCC. But you also don't have to hire us to be successful. You can do it all on your own, but we're always here to support you. And if it's just providing materials, that's free of charge. I can send you anything you need. So. Does that help?
Because, thank you, Amy, with that introduction. First off, I want to thank you for your time this morning, for your presentation, which I hope was helpful to all of the membership in understanding some of the fundamentals for a successful CJCC. Our work with JMI is planned to continue though, because we, the membership asked to work to identify some priorities that are common amongst us. And in order to facilitate that, we have engaged Amy with JMI to continue that process. So the next steps, assuming everyone is comfortable and on board, would involve Amy engaging in the one-on-one discussions with each of the members to hear from you what you see as concerns from your respective agencies that could be potential priorities for the group. Then we're asking JMI to really assimilate that information and present it to the group so we learn from each other, we really learn what each other's priorities are. And then we can work towards this consensus of identifying anywhere from 1 to probably no more than 3, because they really recommend no more than 3 priorities, and start to work towards identifying those priorities for the group to move forward on. That would involve the one-on-one meetings that can occur by phone or by Zoom, and then meeting again to have that robust discussion, learn about what each other identified as priorities, and then work to establish a consensus. Any concerns or disagreement about that next step? I'm hoping this is in line with what was requested at our first meeting in January. Is this where everyone anticipated going?
Yeah.
Okay. So those next steps will involve those one-on-ones, which Amy will reach out to you individually to get those on your calendars and coordinate that. And then we need to meet again. I am confident we need more than 90 minutes to engage in this robust exchange. So thank you to my vice chair for setting that discussion up, because 90 minutes will not be adequate to learn from each other as to the priorities that are of interest, and also then work towards a consensus. I'm thinking it's probably going to be a half day. That would be necessary for that, morning or afternoon. Thoughts on whether you could commit to at least a half day? Anyone have any reservations about that? You're all very busy people, so I thank you for your commitment ahead of time. Amy had proposed the last week of July as a possible time frame because it aligned with some other matters that made it particularly feasible. If you have access to your calendar, if you wouldn't mind taking a moment to look at it. Of course, we live in Wisconsin, so everyone likes to vacation in those timeframes, which I completely understand. But our objective is to have 100% participation. So if there's something that makes that week right now not achievable, I'd love to hear it so we can explore other options.
You're talking about the 28th, July 28th.
No, I just
Looking first.
the second to last weekend, week of July 21st. Thank you for clarifying.
I have one of these.
Are there any that would plan absences at this point?
Specifically to that week.
Yes.
No.
Okay.
No.
We have a couple of other members that are not here that we need to hear from as well. And so I'm going to make some efforts to see what their situation is. I think in the effort to achieve 100% participation, which I would like to be the goal, we will circle back with JMI, see what other options they can provide, and then do what is sort of the form of a doodle poll where we determine what we can achieve looking for 100% attendance. I'm not willing to forego anyone at this point, but I think we can explore other options and have other members check in as well. So please look for that and then participate in that with your responses so we can try to achieve 100% participation. So we'll hold open another date at this point. Attorney Stewart, do I need to have a motion with regards to modifying any prior dates? Or,
No, no, you're.
okay, all right, I just want to make sure we don't need to address it as business. So we'll hold that issue open, pending further confirmation from everyone. Amy, what have we overlooked in terms of discussing next steps?
I don't think anything, that was all I had in mind, thank you.
Any other comments, concerns from members before I ask for a motion to adjourn?
I have one. Can you just go back again? What are the key points that we should look forward to during our one-on-ones?
Oh, just that we'll talk about?
Yeah.
So we'll talk about kind of what you envision for the CJCC. I just wanna learn what you think is most important. But I think what we'll talk about most of the time is what are your challenges, what are your priorities from your office's perspective? So what you think the CJCC could be working on. Yes.
To that point, I thought what was also very helpful, Amy, were some of the other priorities from other CJCCs and the projects that they worked on and some of the areas that I think we're familiar with, but not sure what projects or solutions would be implemented in order to address them. So that was particularly helpful. Thank you for that. Other comments?
In that regard, will you be sharing contact information with Amy, or should we all make sure she has it directly?
Attorney Stern will.
Oh, very good, thank you.
Be sharing the contact information. I'll also ensure that these materials are provided electronically, so that other members who weren't here have them as well.
And feel free to reach out to me at any time, once you have my contact information, because I'll reach out to you to set up an interview. But feel free to reach out to me at any time with any questions following this meeting about the contents of this meeting, but also to find out more about what other jurisdictions are doing.
Any other comments, feedback, questions, concerns? If none, then I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. All right, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Thank you for prioritizing this group, and we will see you shortly.